Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today I have with me Mr. Khalid Mohammed and Shahid Raza who will give their analysis on the Russia-India military and economic cooperation, and we will discuss this in the light of President Putin's recent visit to India this week. Khalid Mohammed is an independent security analyst and Director General at Command 11. And Shahid Raza is also a defense and security analyst who has made his mark in this field. Thank you for joining us today. Okay, I will start with a quote from Andrew Korebko, who is a Moscow-based analyst, and he specializes in the geopolitics of the Eurasian region. According to him, the de facto Russian-Indian balancing alliance that was agreed to during this week's Putin-Modi summit is one of the most significant diplomatic developments this century thus far. It is truly a global geostrategic game changer because of the irreplaceable role that it aims to play in the ongoing US-Chinese new Cold War. I want to know that, do you give this visit as much importance as some analysts are giving? And did Russia and China sign the most important military and economic deals of this century? Secondly, the question that is on every Pakistani's mind, it is that how this Russia-India romance is going to affect Pakistan. Shahid, you go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and it's great to be here. It's also great to have Khalid, who I hope he can speak with us today. I think you have to understand what Russia's real position in the region is. Recently, we had the opportunity to listen to one of the leading Russian policy scholars out of Moscow. He was one of the leading figures at the Russian International Affairs Council in Moscow. So he said something very interesting, and that kind of encapsulates how Russia perceives itself. Before I go on to explain what it is, I would like to say that how a country perceives itself does not necessarily tell the entire story. About that country. It does not make a statement of fact. Just because a country sees itself in a certain manner does not automatically mean that it's reality, right? So every country has a right to establish its own perceptions. So I'm just going to, give you the reference. And this scholar stated that Russia sees itself as an independent big power, like a superpower in the region, and it will have relations with your enemies, and it will expect you to accept and work with Russia, regardless of that fact. What it means is that there is something called Russian exceptionalism. So Russia perceives that it can have relations with China, India, Pakistan at the same time, and their internal rivalries do not affect Moscow's position. And that is the model Russia has implemented across the board under Putin, especially after 2010, because we kind of saw a resurgence in Russian foreign policy after 2010. So if you look at the greater Middle East, if you look at North Africa region, if you look at the Eastern Europe, and indeed the Central and South Asian region, we see that this particular trend, it manifests. And it really reflects in this specific deal, $5 billion worth of deal, which I have written extensively about. The S-400 is a surface-to-air missile system, not to be confused with a anti-ballistic missile system. Its capabilities of stopping or intercepting anti-ballistic missile systems is quite limited. But it is interesting to note that Russia has supplied the same S-400 system to China first, and now they are supplying it to India. And the offer for S-400's purchase for Pakistan has always been on table as well. So they have been offering the same missile system to Pakistan as well. They've been actively marketing the S-400 to Pakistan. So let's go back and look at the economics, right? So Russia, the biggest source of revenue for the Russian Federation is their oil and gas industry. Second biggest source of income for the Russian Federation is the export of military hardware, services, spare parts, and other associated equipment that they provide or sell on the international market. And that is the second largest source of income for the GDP. So in that context, military sales are very important for Russia. And in this context, India is very important because historically, for a very long time, India has been the biggest customer, biggest customer for Russian military hardware, which again, contributes significantly to Russia's GDP, making it very important for Russia. India currently is purchasing S-400 missile system, surface-to-air missile system. It also has over 1,000 T-90 advanced variants of T-90 tanks on order. It has recently placed a significant order for 700,000 modern Russian AK-12 Kalashnikovs, which again amounts to a several $billion contract over its life cycle period. And they have another significant order of several MiG-29s and the Su-30 and GAI, an upgrade of the same aircraft. And I can name several other deals that exist or are in the pipeline between India and Russia. So it's big business for Moscow. So it is unavoidable, and it does not make economic sense for Russia to try and move away from India. And from Russia's part, it really states that they do not want to lose India completely to the United States. And for India's part, being close to Russia serves as a counterbalance to the United States, because the Indians are very interested in maintaining this thin balance between the U.S. and Russia. We have seen that the United States was very quick to impose military sanctions on Turkey, which is a NATO country, but for the purchase of the S-400 surface-to-air missile system. But we have not seen a similar movement, similar imposition of sanctions against India for the purchase of the same system from Russia. So it really speaks to the double standards or the priorities of the American establishment at this particular moment, because India is ostensibly, and I would stress the word ostensibly, portraying itself as a counterweight to China, which it is not. It has been proven time and again that India is not either incapable or unwilling as a military power to help America with its China containment strategy. And I think this particular deal and the visit of Putin to India from both countries' perspective is not really a game changer in my perspective. It's more of rapprochement, because the ties between the two countries have been very frosty, because India has been under Modi, has been very aggressively pursuing a pro-American policy. It has become part of the Quad. It has signed several deals with the U.S. like the NOAA, Kamkasa, etc. So the U.S. has been trying actively to pull India into its orbit, while Russia is trying to retain its position in India. So I think that kind of explains that balancing act I was talking about, and going back to that anecdotal reference to that particular Russian scholar. So it really speaks to Russia's its perception of exceptionalism, and its ability to to basically implement its policy with that exceptionalism, having to work with your enemies and you at the same time. I mean, that's a very interesting take on foreign policy. We'll have to see if it kind of sustains or it does not. So with that, I'll hand the floor back to you. Thank you.
Okay, that's very interesting, Shahid. So you were telling us that Russia has been marketing S-400 to Pakistan as well. So how can Pakistan act more wisely in this regard? Okay, we will come to that later. But Khalid, what I have gathered from Shahid, he's saying that Russia is practicing military diplomacy to achieve political ends. And in this case, it's exporting equally strategic and high quality arms and weapons to both China and India, which are rivals, in order to maintain the balance of power between them. So do you agree with this point of view? Because this is in complete contrast with the American practice of military diplomacy, because they attempt to give their preferred partner a military edge in order to encourage aggressive attempts instead of resolving the disputes. So what do you have to say about this Russian military diplomacy?
I think Shahid's exactly right in his analysis. Russia is playing a very good game. We have to understand that at this point in time, the original Cold War between Russia and the United States has now been changed to to the U.S. and China. Russia being somewhat mentally, somewhat diplomatically, somewhat perceptionally minimized in the view of China being a bigger threat has hurt the Russian ego. I think the move with India, Shahid's right, India is trying to portray itself as a very strong player in the region, kind of a counterbalance to China, but they are not. Russia is working a basic game plan of supplying both of your enemies. A weaker China means a stronger Russia. Complacent India means a stronger Russia. You have to understand that Russia has also been making moves in the Central Asian states. We've seen Ukraine, we have seen Georgia, we have seen other countries that have been coming under, if not under Russian takeover, but at least in understanding in terms of logic and in terms of movement. It's very clear that Russia is playing a very simple game of trying to maintain its position in the region while China emerges as a new superpower. I think the threat here is where can this go? We have to remember that Pakistan is also in a very unstable position, both economically and strategically, because the U.S. has its focus on Pakistan, and we will be seeing some kind of trouble from the American side, which is why the diplomacy is heavy to the U.S. side now. We have to be careful here because Russia is playing a very dirty game. Perception is very key for Putin. He has made that clear, much like Modi's India is about perception. Whatever's going on inside the country, it is very, very great efforts are made to limit the external exposure of those problems, while Russia portrays itself as strong, emerging, economically developing, militarily strong, industrial state building stronger. So we have to be very careful. And I think that's where my answer ends.
Right. Okay. Recently, we have seen that Russia is now even warming up ties with the former Soviet-era rival. I'm talking about Pakistan. And we have seen an increase in military and economic cooperation with Russia, which was recently considered impossible. And Pakistan and Russia have been holding joint military exercises named Dozba since 2016. My question is, Shahid, how can we, Pakistan, increase military and economic cooperation with Russia?
Thank you, Qudsiya. First of all, when it comes to Russia, to be very honest, as Pakistan, if I was, running the policy, I would be very, very careful. First of all, I mean, Russia is a very it's a country that is in a state of resurgence, right? So when you're in a phase of resurgence and you're trying to become a superpower, you're trying to become a superpower again, and you are trying to create new alliances. You have to be very careful because it's an opportunity, but it's also a double-edged sword. In this context, I feel that increasing military cooperation with Russia certainly has its merits, but those merits themselves have to be critically weighed in under the pretext of Pakistan's geostrategic interests. Let me give you an animated example of what I mean. First of all, let me ask you a question, right? Is Russia willing to provide top-tier technology, military technology, to Pakistan? That is a question, right? If the answer to that question is no, then again, our rapprochement with Russia has to be calculated, because if Russia is not willing to provide Pakistan with its top-tier military technology, especially the sort of systems we need, then the scale of cooperation between the two countries will have to be limited by design, because Russia has placed a limit on it, right? But at the same time, if Russia, and that is a decision for Russia to make, right? If Russia is interested and willing, which should be very fair, they have recently been more susceptible to provide high-tech military hardware to Pakistan, especially the hardware that we require, rather than the hardware they want to pitch us. Then there is room for cooperation between the two countries. Because frankly speaking, Russia, there are two things we can cooperate with Russia. Russia is not like China, right? So you can't trade with them as such. You either allow Russia to build an oil and gas pipeline down to Pakistan, into India, all the way from Siberia. That might be a very suitable geopolitical, geo-economic move through Afghanistan, involving all Central Asian countries. That might create a lot of balance in the region, that might entrench Russia into the region as well. Obviously, it will increase their influence, but at the same time, it will also increase their dependencies. That is one thing that can be done. Secondly, like I said, their first biggest export is energy, second biggest export is weapons. So you either have to be an energy consumer for Russia, or you have to be a weapons customer, right? Weapons customer, from their point of view, is India, has been for a very long time, still is, and is likely to remain the top customer for Russia. Because China, to be very frank, could have been an ideal customer for the Russian military hardware, but China's military industry has boomed over the past 20 years because of the reforms and because of the heavy investment that's been made by the Chinese government into its military defense research ecosystem. So China, to a great extent, has managed to develop an independent military-industrial complex of its own. They have a robust aviation industry. It can compete with Russia, if not surpass them. It is manufacturing some very high-tech equipment and hardware, software. So Chinese defense industry is catching up very fast to the Russian capabilities, right? So China is not as big of a client for the Russian defense industry as India is, because India is a large country. It has a lot of money to spend on its military. It has a active $270 billion budget that they're supposed to spend around 2027. So in that context, Russia wants a large piece of that $270 billion spending on the Indian military modernization plan. So can Pakistan match India's spending pound for pound? The answer is no. Can Pakistan have a hybrid approach towards relations with Russia that involves geo-economic, transit corridor, energy cooperation, and military cooperation? Absolutely yes. So this is a very fluid context, because Pakistan's purchasing power as far as military hardware is concerned is quite limited. So and whatever hardware requirements we have, we generally opt to purchase them from China because China, for example, recently has provided or has sold a new type of main battle tank to the Pakistani army. They are selling fighter aircraft to Pakistan. There are some joint venture programs that are going on, and Chinese, frankly speaking, are more open and business-oriented as far as defense deals go. So I'll let Khalid explain this a little bit more. Thank you.
Ms. Khalid, please, what is your comment on this? And then I can move towards the questions that listeners are sending.
I think Shahid's got it right, but I think we're also forgetting one small player in the region that provides a lot of opportunity between Pakistan and Russia, which would be the development and the stability of Afghanistan. We do know that the Russians are supplying fuel into Afghanistan through the Central Asian republics, and we do know that the Russians have been very friendly in negotiating with the Taliban and helping to bring them into some stability of some kind. I do think Pakistan is limited in what it can do in terms of competing with India, but I don't think this is a competition in terms of financial strength. I think Russia is looking at this from the point of view of where it needs to be positioned when the U.S. and China go at each other, whether it be economically or whether it be militarily. So the relationship with India is I think based on that. I think the relationship with Pakistan will be much more strategic than it will be economic. That strategic relation will come in terms of military. There will be a lot more cooperation between both military forces. I think we will see some research and development and some technological development coming into Pakistan from the Russian side. It will not match what China has to offer Pakistan, but it will be an effort by the Russian establishment to start building ties with Pakistan on the parallel side with China. Again, my understanding or my belief is that Russia is trying to flex its muscles right now. Shahid's right in terms of the research in Russia. And the types of relationships that we can have with the Russian Republic are not the same as we can with other countries. But there has to be an understanding here that Russia is looking to reestablish itself, to reposition itself in the region with China emerging as a new superpower. Having dealt with the U.S. for so long, I think the Russians do understand what they need to do. There's a lot of disinformation, a lot of things floating around trying to build a much stronger position for the Russian government. And I think it's going to develop more. Pakistan needs to be careful on how they deal with the Russians because we are playing with a double-edged sword. They are friends with the Indians. They are supplying the Indians. And getting into bed with someone who is in bed with your enemy is never going to be very successful. So it's with a grain of salt that we have to look at what the Russians are doing and getting an understanding of what they can potentially do to Pakistan if the relationship starts to become sour. For example, if Pakistan-U.S. relations become more entrenched or start to develop, what will be the potential fallout from the Russian side? These are things that we need to look at before we get into bed with the Russians. So with that, I'll hand it back over to you.
And with this Syeda, regarding what Khalid is saying, if I try to kind of encapsulate it a little bit, before you write a strategy, the first thing you need to do is write an exit strategy. That is the first thing you do. You write, for every strategy there's got to be an exit strategy. So I actually agree with what Khalid has done. If there's no exit strategy in place, and if we have not been able to simulate and predict and forecast scenarios in which both countries could actually be at odds, which is more than likely to happen, we need to be able to calculate those options, because at the end of the day, geopolitics or geoeconomics is a game of mathematics. It's all based on game theory. So we have to be very careful, and we have to approach our new alliances. And let's not forget the role of the United States here. I want to hear from Khalid about this, though. I tweeted it today that Pakistan is the exit strategy for the United States should its China containment strategy fail. So if the China containment doesn't work, what happens next? And we both understand that the China containment strategy is not very likely to function because there's a lot of disparity and there's a lot of interdependence. They keep talking about 30-sided trap, but I'm not really sure if this situation between China and the U.S. meets that criteria. And if it doesn't work, what's in it for Pakistan? Like what happens next? Again, before I hand it over back to you, just very quickly, I was at the Mandala dialogue today, and the most interesting part I observed today is apart from Prime Minister inaugurating the session and everything, and they were like there was this dedicated forum for I just called the Commanders Forum, right? So we had retired military, high-ranking military officers from Pakistan, from the United States, from the United Kingdom, and from China. So it was a very unique forum where we got to hear from high-ranking retired military experts from these countries, and it was just refreshing to hear because their views on how the future of war is going to evolve were very interesting. And this is just an interesting example of what Pakistan can do as a mediator in the new Cold War. I think that is the position we should be in as far as Russia, China, US is concerned.
Right. So you were talking about US's China containment strategy. I have read about it on Twitter. Someone was saying that the Kremlin is thinking that if India is going to arm itself to the teeth anyhow, then it's better for it to do so with Russian arms than with the American ones. How do you think the US is going to react to these deals that India has just signed with Russia? Khalid, first you go.
Well, I think we need to understand that India is going to play a very big role in what happens next. With the Indians already having signed so many defense deals and so many intelligence deals with the Americans, if I was the Russian establishment, I'd be very concerned in terms of what kind of access would be provided to Russian technology or Russian intelligence because of that. India arming itself to the teeth is going to happen anyway. They believe that they are the next potential superpower after the United States. Modi has presented India as such. The standoff with the Chinese was India almost trying to show that it does have the power to stand up to the Chinese military. And there was a lot of talk in terms of a two-front war where they could handle Pakistan and China at the same time. A false sense of superiority was being developed within the Indian Republic. The problem is India tends to believe its own narratives. And they will fall prey to buy it to the teeth. But it's not just a Russian problem. Russia will supply, the United States will supply, the Israelis will supply, the Chinese will supply. Everyone is going to take advantage of the Indian buying spree. So I think we need to take that off of the table. Shahid made a comment about the Chinese containment strategy of the United States. Just the oxymoron of a Chinese containment strategy is very funny, being that the U.S. is completely economically dependent upon China. You cannot talk about breaking off a relationship that is so inbuilt, so strong. I would almost say it this way. China and the United States ending their relationship is equivalent to the U.S. ending it with Israel. The ties are so deep that they cannot break them easily. Will there be a Cold War? Yes. Will there be an impact on the region? Most definitely. Will there be fallout in Pakistan? Without a doubt. We will tend to depend more on the Chinese, which is good for Pakistan if from a foreign policy point of view. If I was writing policy for the government, I would be developing more relationships with the Chinese and stepping farther away from the Americans. The Americans are in the state of decline. Their own country is looking at multiple conflicts within its own people. it is not time to be cozying up to the United States. They will need a scapegoat of some kind, and it would be very, very bad if Pakistan became the scapegoat. And it's just better if we step away from the United States right now and make close friends with the Chinese, talk to the Russians, and start to build it. The containment of the Chinese is impossible because as they expand, as a superpower, the approach, the influence, the sway they will have in foreign capitals is going to increase significantly. Again, with the failure of the United States in Afghanistan, the concept of the power of the Americans has significantly decreased, and that has been played very, very strongly by the Chinese to establish themselves as superior, willing to step forward to develop and to spend their own money to develop. And that's something we have to understand.
Right. Okay, Khalid, you're saying that US is in a state of decline and Pakistan should look towards Russia and China more. What do you have to say about this, Shahid?
Look, I think Khalid is absolutely right, but we have to realize that the kind of world which might emerge from this new Cold War, it's not going to be all about China, though. I mean, the Chinese economy has several dependencies. For example, it is dependent on the global consumer market, right? So China is the producer of goods, but its goods, most expensive ones, are sold in Europe. European Union is the biggest customer for the Chinese goods, followed closely by the United States, ASEAN countries, Gulf countries, etc. China provides, produce goods to the rest of the world, but at the same time we have to understand that so there's a very interesting statistic, right? And I would like to hear from Khalid as well. The biggest factor in my mind regarding the new Cold War, because this is a technological war. There was a recent study which I was reading. The volume of patents in the U.S., the patent capital in the U.S. is around $2.3 trillion, and in China it's around $300 billion. So there's a huge disparity in intellectual property and research ecosystems. China lags in several key technologies. And I think, the way I see it is that it's not either or. I have been saying this for several years now, and I feel that there is going to be a time when China and the US are going to sit down and they are going to define their spheres of influence. They are going to define and agree upon a share of the global power, especially in China's most immediate region. And that equilibrium is an ideal condition for everybody, right? So I think both countries will eventually come to a Nash equilibrium of sorts rather than come to conflict. Because if there is a conflict, I do not think that the United States is going to win the conflict. China will be significantly damaged. But U.S. is not going to win the conflict. U.S. and its allies will suffer significant losses. Taiwan will almost certainly face very significant losses as a country because it will be turned into a battlefield. But if there is a war, it is going to end in equilibrium, which makes that war not very suitable for the aggressor, for the U.S., right? Because if they go to war and they can't meet their war objectives, the war is not worth fighting for, right? So at the end of the day, I feel that both countries, they will come to a closure. It could happen in 5 years. Certainly not going to happen within these 5 years because Xi Jinping himself is very belligerent towards the West. And West is also very belligerent at the moment, but beyond 5 years, 10-year period, there might be a brief conflict somewhere, but I can't see a large scale war between the U.S. and China. And if they do end up signing an equilibrium or like a deal of a century of sorts, that is probably the ideal condition for the rest of the world, that these two countries don't get to fight each other.
Okay, let's hope both of these superpowers will realize that it's better for the whole peace of the whole world that they resolve their differences amicably. I have received a question from this is a Twitter handle Striver, and he's saying, do you think that Imran Khan's recent statement that we don't want to be part of any bloc may be difficult to sustain for long? Pakistan has practically distanced itself somewhat from the US camp. Khalid, you go first.
Well, I think the second part is wrong, that we've distanced ourselves from the US camp. We are still quoting the Americans. The broad-based strategy that is being quoted in Washington is still not defined in terms of what that broad-based strategy is going to be. So I think there is still this discussion going on with the Americans. In terms of not being part of any bloc, I think Shahid's right that we should play mediator in all the conversations. If we were to align with one side, the impact from the other side could be significant to Pakistan. So yes, we do need to play a mediator's role. Imran Khan's belief or statement that we should not be part of a bloc or we will not be part of any bloc is very good window dressing, but I think behind the scenes, while we play mediator, we do need to look at Pakistan's interests. And Pakistan's interests are best served with which country, which region, which power, and those are a much more focused understanding of what needs to be done for the nation. So yes, I think across the table saying we won't be part of any bloc is good, but I don't think we can maintain that position for more than a couple years, maybe 3 years. But we'll have to take a position at some point.
What do you have to say, Shahid, to the same question?
Well, if I may expand a little bit on what Khalid is saying, every time I get asked this question, what side Pakistan is on, my response is it's on its own side. That's because we do have Pakistan does not need to be on any country's side. We do not need to be in the American camp. We need not to be in the Chinese camp. Need not to be in the Russian camp. Need not to be in the Saudi camp or the Iranian camp or whatever camps there are. Simple fact of the matter is that we are a camp. We are a country of 233 million people. 65% of our population is under the age of 35. 55% of our population is basically Gen Z, born after 1997. We have 230 universities. We are producing 45,000 technology graduates every year. We have a booming technology sector in this country. By 2025, 122 million Pakistanis will be middle class, which is the greatest expansion of middle class after China and India. So we will be number 3 in the world in terms of expansion of middle class. Pakistan's overall middle class spending has crossed $300 billion. We are a $100 billion trading economy. The future is absolutely bright for Pakistan, regardless of how depressing it looks right now in the short term. Pakistan's future, long-term future, is absolutely bright. I have absolutely no doubt about that. So in this context, I mean, we know all of the usual cliche, vanilla, things we say about Pakistan being a nuclear power, being a military power, and everything. That just adds into our national power itself. But I want to talk more about economics, right? So, from an economic point of view, Pakistan has a lot going for it, right? I mean, poverty in Pakistan has declined while it's increasing in India as a percentage. Poverty in Pakistan has declined to 22%, and it's constantly going down, right? So that is, to be very frank and very honest, Pakistan is the youngest country in the top 5 countries in the world. So we have a huge youth arbitrage that will give us youth, that will basically give us workforce dividend out to 2047. So if we use this opportunity I have absolutely no doubt that within the next 20 years, Pakistan will be a middle power. That's because of all of these dynamics that are affecting Pakistan's economic forecasting in the future. You have seen that a lot of the large-scale global tech investors are coming to Pakistan because that there is a lot of juice in the market, so to speak. And look, to be honest, all Pakistan needs is 10 to 15 years of political and geopolitical stability. So if for the next 10 to 15 years we can ensure that there is no war in our region, we are not involved in a large-scale war, and at the same time we can ensure political stability inside. I can see Pakistan talking to Russia and some other countries on reasonable footing, if not equal footing, 10 to 15 years down the track, because economically we'll catch up with these countries. Pakistan's economy has a lot of potential, and I think that's the thought process behind the recent shift to the geo-economic model rather than a geopolitical model. So it really depends how Pakistan plays its cards, going forward. So I feel that the future for Pakistan is absolutely bright. We not only will become a major trading economy in the region, we will become a major power in the region as well because of all of these factors I've just mentioned. Thank you.
Right. I completely agree with you, Shahid. You're saying that Pakistan should not be in any camp, the US camp or the Russian camp. I think here we need to learn from Russia because it balances its relations with all the countries, even rival countries like we see with Syria and Israel. It's on equally good terms with both Syria and Israel, although they are rivals. Similarly, in the case of China and India, we see that it's selling military equipment to China and its rival India as well. And it started holding military exercises with Pakistan, even though Pakistan is India's rival. So, yes, we need to learn from that.
And Syeda, there is one more important point here. We've been talking about Russia's influence, but where does the influence come from, right? It stems from two major sources. Russia's influence majorly stems from its energy exports and its military exports, right? So in this context, I keep saying this, right? Pakistan has a lot of potential as far as military research, development, manufacturing, and export cycle is concerned. We do not have we have not focused on this as an industry. For several decades, Pakistani state was fixated with the idea that we should be self-sustainable, which is a noble goal, but self-sustainable without profitability is kind of a lame duck solution to a wrong problem, So what Pakistan needs to do is one thing that we do need to learn from Russia is that military equipment, military hardware, it is a significant enabler of geopolitical power, right? So if you sell a high-ticket military equipment to a country, that country is likely to stick with you for at least 30 years over the life cycle period of that particular military hardware if it's a fighter aircraft. For example, we purchased the F-16 aircraft from the US back in the 80s and some in around 2010. So we are, whether we like it or not, we have to be on good relations. If not good relations, working relations with the US because we are dependent on the United States for the supply of parts, for the supply of refurbishment, of equipment, of software, of weapons, and upgrades. So this is a legitimate requirement that you would have as a client state if you are importing sophisticated military hardware. So this is a sector that Pakistan really needs to invest in because it enables you as a regional power to kind of have influence in different parts of the world. And obviously it's a slip. It's like it's a really high-end market. But Pakistan has a lot of experience. We have several established establishments which can mass produce. The only thing we kind of need to focus in is to develop a technological R&D startup ecosystem with specific reference to the defense tech ecosystem, which, for example, has been built in Turkey. Imagine what Turkey has done with its drones and how those drones were used in the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. With absolutely deadly effects and with effects that actually decided the outcome of that war with limited human casualties. That's absolutely a fascinating case study for a country like Pakistan to enable its defense R&D tech ecosystem. Thank you.
Right. And I received a question from Irfan Ali, and he's saying, is it not moral and ethical responsibility of the major global powers to sell weapons on some conditions? Russian weapons to extremist Modi government is a threat to the peace of Asia. What do you have to say about this, Khalid?
I think the first main thing we understand is that war is never waged on ethical grounds. Supplying your enemies is nothing new for the world. And supplying your enemy's enemy is even more fun for these countries because they look at it as a business object. It's commercial. And commercially, they don't think ethically. From our point of view, yes, ethically, they should be looking at the point of view these weapons will be used against the citizens of a country, not against a foreign power invading or in a war or in a conflict. But it's like espionage. There is no such thing as ethics. And in war and politics, the ethics question always goes out the window. And I think down the road with the change in what warfare is going to be, moving from weapons to opinions, narratives, information, digital infrastructures, the concept is going to change now. We have to understand that no matter what we think about how warfare should be done, the idea of ethics doesn't ever come into the conversation at this point. Down the road, with the changes in warfare, in the conceptual changes of what warfare is going to be, we may see more ethical attacks. But right now, it's your enemy's enemy is even your friend, and you don't really care anymore. And warfare has become so brutal because we have given up the ethical or the thought process behind what we're supplying, who we're supplying, and why we're supplying. So I'll leave it there.
And it's, Khalid said, we keep talking about this military concept called automated kill chain, right? So it's very important to understand where the human element exists in the command and control structure if we are going to build a so-called automated kill chain. So automated kill chain is basically it's an entire ecosystem that develops, includes a lot of the, let's say, modern technologies, unmanned assets, especially drones and stuff, missiles, and autonomous AI-based weapons. So to have a human, not have a human, but to have human decision makers in the loop is absolutely necessary. And as far as the wars and ethics are concerned, I mean, war is essentially breakdown of ethics. That's what it is. And there are no ethics in international arms trade. That's just the way it's been. That's the rules which have been set in the international arms trade. And it's just, for example, when the U.S., when Israel goes out and bombards Gaza or other parts of Palestine, the U.S. government goes ahead and replenishes their armament with billions and billions of dollars worth of munitions, right? So there is no ethics involved in warfare. That's just the sad reality of things.
True. Okay. Now I've received a question from India. This is Vinayak. Sorry if I cannot pronounce your name correctly. He's saying, what is the scope of the Shanghai Coordination Organization group for Pakistan, Russia and India? Can they engage there? This is his question. Shahid,
Who is this question?
Shahid, can you take this?
Sure. Shanghai Cooperation Organization is a regional cooperation platform that was initiated by China. Russia is a significant member partner. It involves Central Asian countries, involves Pakistan and Russia, and India as well. But I think India has been struggling to find its place in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization structure because while India is member of SCO, it has cultivated alliances with the United States, and it is trying to play both sides. So it is unlikely that India will find significant success inside this Shanghai Cooperation Organization system because the SCO countries are well aware of India's geopolitical strategy or rather the lack of geopolitical strategy, because India has not been focused for a very long time, not been focused on regional integration. Living, breathing example, what it did to SARC. There was going to be a summit, SARC summit in Islamabad. It was sabotaged by the Indian government, and no SARC heads of state meeting or summit has taken place since, because India was at that point in time trying rather foolishly to quote-unquote contain and isolate Pakistan internationally. Obviously that did not happen, and now SARC is essentially dead. So India has not, it is fancy for India to claim that it is all for regional integration or it is all for regional cooperation, but its actions defy its words, basically. So if India was serious about regional cooperation, there is a lot India can do. India is a large country. It has a huge economy. It's one of the largest countries in the region. And being large and big and ambitious comes with responsibility, which Indian establishment is simply not willing to take.
Right. Okay. Now I have a question from Muhammad Hasib Ehsan, and he's asking, is Sino-Russian nexus powerful enough to bring Western powers to the table in order to stabilize Afghanistan, to have regional integration for economic benefits? Khalid, can you please take this question?
I really don't think the objectives right now are to bring any kind of stability anywhere in the region or in the world. The U.S. is a superpower. The Chinese are emerging as a superpower. The Russians still proclaim themselves as a superpower. India is attempting to emerge itself as an emerging superpower in the region. There's no stability that anyone's looking for right now. I think everyone's playing on a global chessboard and trying to build their position for where they need to be when the next move happens. I don't think that we can understand where the Sino-Russian-China relationship is going to go, because we're in a very initial stage. Because the shift in focus has moved from the Russians to the Chinese now, and the U.S. is expanding the way they want to sanction or move against the Chinese. It's very initial into what's going to happen and who is going to emerge as a player and what reasons going to emerge as a player. I think Shahid's right in terms of Europeans being able to provide significant influence or significant understanding into where this movement is going to go. Because being very close to the Chinese economically and financially, they have an understanding that they can give us. The Americans are going to start some sort of conflict. My understanding is that India will be used as a proxy of some kind against the Chinese, which might be why the Indians are arming themselves to the teeth, because there could be a conflict very easily escalated between both countries, and the advantage would go to the U.S. while still damaging the Chinese. So I think we're in the early stages right now. Maybe 18 months, 24 months from now, we'll be able to understand better what relationship has impacted and how it's going to continue to impact and what needs to change where. I'll leave my answer there.
Shahid, what is your take on this question?
Well, first of all, there is no China. There is no China-Russian nexus. They don't have a written treaty alliance. There was some talk of a Russia-China defense agreement. I remember having this conversation with Khalid several months ago. There was some possibility of a mutual defense treaty between China and Russia, but it hasn't happened. So there is no nexus of sorts. We have to see this in isolation, that China and Russia, they cooperate with each other if and when it suits their interests, right? So it's a transactional relationship, and to bring Western powers to the table, I mean, Western powers have never really left the table. They can sit down and negotiate on as many forums as they're, as possible, right? I mean, they have the United Nations, they have, they can sit in Geneva, they can sit at G20, they can sit at G7. There are many forums, so there's no shortage of forums to speak. There's no shortage of interaction. I mean, China and Russia and United States, they have, kind of a triangular problem. But we have to understand that these three countries, as Khalid has explained, have divergent interests. They can't have a nexus with each other because, again, as Khalid explained earlier, the ideal scenario is to supply arms to your enemy, and if you can supply arms to their enemy, that's even better. So it's a really interesting example of how a triangular competition is unfolding in the new Cold War scenario. We can't really have a nexus between China and Russia unless and until obviously they have a written agreement, which is unlikely to happen. I feel that the Western countries do not really feel too concerned about the cooperation between China and Russia, because they understand that they're competing with each other at the same time. So it's not just cooperation. I mean, everything is not hunky-dory between Moscow and Beijing, right? So the West knows this. So they have a very careful strategy in place to kind of play on the weaknesses of both sides, to play on the differences and divergent interests of both sides at the same time. So Russia, for example, is, to be very, very clear, Russia is a military threat to the West as far as Eastern Europe is concerned. Again, Khalid is a good friend of mine. We keep having these conversations whenever we catch up. Our conversations normally sound like this. So we had this conversation, Khalid and I had this conversation around 2 years ago when there was escalation in Ukraine. So look, why Ukraine? There was an intelligence report, an advisory that was recently issued by a NATO member state, in which they warned that the Russian military was preparing around 172,000 troops to invade Ukraine. So why Ukraine, right? If Russia takes over Ukraine, they would kind of reinstate their capability to have, so there's something called strategic blackmail, right? So in order to strategically blackmail your adversary, you need to have the capability to threaten their land. So you need to be able to threaten them with occupation. So that is the real dividend for the Russian state here. So Ukraine for a very long time has served as a buffer state between East and the West, right? So between Russia and Europe. And whosoever has controlled Ukraine has controlled the escalation dynamics and the escalation ladder between the two countries. For example, if we reverse the scenario, let's simulate this, right? If we reverse the scenario, what happens when, imagine a world where Ukraine has become a NATO member state. So what happens is the NATO military forces, combined structure of the NATO armed forces, it would move into Ukraine. Ukrainian military would adapt to NATO military standards in training methods, caliber of weapons, types of weapons, communications equipment, integrated command and control system, C4I star systems, intelligence gathering, all that, right? So once that happens, Moscow itself is actually not very far from Ukraine. So what Russia fears is that their capital lies within the striking range of the NATO alliance, which is something that hasn't happened since Napoleonic Wars, right? So Russia sees that and again, we keep having these conversations between me and Khalid. Russia sees this as an existential dilemma, right? So this is not something that Russia feels that, this is against our interest. No, Russia sees this as an existential dilemma, which is why they are taking belligerent, active, forward action, military action in Crimea, in the Black Sea, inside Ukraine, in Donbass, and some other regions as well. And now they are planning to invade. Apparently, as far as NATO reports are concerned, planning to invade Ukraine. So I think it's an interesting mix because on one side, and going back to the original pointer here, Russia threatens the territorial integrity of Eastern Europe. So it's an existential threat to Eastern Europe. It poses an occupational threat to Eastern Europe. But at the same time, China does not really pose a military threat to the West because it does not share a border with any Western country, does not share a border with any NATO country, does not share any maritime border with any NATO country, any NATO member country. So it does not really pose an active forward military threat to any, to the United States or to any of its NATO allies. As far as, some people might be thinking, Taiwan. I kid you not, if China wanted to invade Taiwan, they can take over Taiwan in a weekend, right? Taiwan is not going to last more than a weekend. They will fall quicker than Kabul fell to the Taliban.
Right. Okay, Shahid, I also have a question. It's a little off topic. Do you see any Russian invasion of Ukraine taking place? Because the Western media this is all they can talk about at the moment. Everywhere we see this news that Russia is about to invade Ukraine and, a war is just about to take place. So what do you have to say about that?
Look, I think if Russia was going to really invade Ukraine, and if the Western countries were under, if they had a credible assessment that such an invasion was a possibility, you would have seen a lot of NATO military aid move into Ukraine, right? I think the Western countries are a little bit they're too late to move into Ukraine, because now if all of a sudden Ukraine decides to join NATO, that will actually mean an act of war as far as Russia is concerned under the scenario I've already explained. Okay, so now Ukraine does not have the option to actually join NATO, because if they do that, that will mean initiation of hostilities. What I do see happening though is that Russia will use siege tactics. It will deploy a significant portion of the modernized Russian military on the Ukrainian border, and they will dig in and they will entrench their military under a long-term military escalation strategy. So they will basically create border tensions with Ukraine, and they will try to bring Ukraine to bear, basically bring Ukraine to its knees by applying the threat of violence rather than using violence itself. So when we talk about military invasion, there are 10 things that happen before a military invasion takes place, okay? So Russia is certainly in that place, but I do not think that Russia will go as far as to invade Ukraine in the short term. They will, like I said, they will use siege tactic. They will lay siege to the Black Sea. They will lay siege to the Ukrainian-Russian border, but they are not going to invade Ukraine just yet.
All right. Thank you, Shahid. Khalid, can you please take the next question? It's from an Indian, and his Twitter handle is Thor, NTCCP9, and he's saying, what's your take on by not normalizing their relations with India, Pakistan is limiting their own options, and it's harmful to its own potential.
I think we need to be a little bit clearer. It's not Pakistan that is not trying to normalize relations. Pakistan has taken numerous confidence-building measures with the Indians, but, the Modi India is not as willing to talk to Pakistan as the previous Indian governments were. Are we limiting our opportunities? No, I don't think we are. Let's be honest, India has played this game for a very long time. That Pakistan is the aggressor in the region, and we cause the problems, and we inflame, and we make the Indians have to react. I think that's become very clear now that what's going on inside of India is showing the whole world what is going on. And India's continued attempt to present itself as being the superior state that Pakistan keeps trying to bite in the ankles. I think Shahid had the statement right. If you want to be the superpower, you need to act like a superpower. You need to take the responsibility of a superpower. And you need to act like the big brother and bring peace rather than constantly looking for reasons to create war. I think that's the best way we can answer that. With Shahid, I'll give this one to you. Listen, Shahid, you gave up a big secret that you and I talk to each other a lot offline. And
we talk over coffee and cigars mostly.
Yes, quite often. But I think people are going to start wondering what we talk about. We may end up having to do a recording between the two of us.
Yeah, I think we should start a podcast, like just a conversation. Pakistan, China. It was a zero-sum game. We chose China. That is done. We have stopped basically India. So as of now, the number of Indians in Afghanistan is zero. There are no Indians there, which means that there are no Indians in Central Asia. At the moment, the level of Indian trade with Central Asia is zero. Its trade with Afghanistan is zero. India does not have access to the higher Central Asian region. And Pakistan will ensure that it continues to deny India the access to Central Asia. That is the cost of not working with Pakistan. It is not that Pakistan has isolated itself from India. It is India that has isolated itself from Pakistan and from its own interests. Pakistan offered India to join CPEC and use Pakistan's ground lines of communications to not only trade with China through overland passage, but also to trade with Iran, to trade with Afghanistan and Central Asia in return for geopolitical concessions on Kashmir. So if India feels that Kashmir is worth losing market access to $1 trillion market, smart thinking on India's part. All Pakistan has to do is maintain its current posture, which we are more than capable and willing to do. And India will continue to pay the price for not working with Pakistan. Let me give you an anecdotal example. India wanted to send quote-unquote aid to Afghanistan. It needed Pakistan's permission to do that. In other words, India no longer has options to access Afghanistan without Pakistan's permission. And that is by design. If you are going to try and isolate Pakistan from SAARC, imagine what's going to happen to you in Central Asia, right? So if India has cards against Pakistan, Pakistan has cards against India. If the Indian current Indian administration, which is a Hindu fascist terrorist government, if they do come to their senses and they look for regional cooperation, Pakistan will still be willing to work with them. But if they don't, which they are more than likely to do, India will not have access to Pakistan. It will not have access to Iran. It will not have access to Afghanistan and the entire Greater Central Asian Belt, which is supposed to be, which is basically emerging as the next economic frontier as far as resource economics is concerned. So that's where most of global resources are going to be in the future. And when that region is connected through projects like CAREC and CPEC and others, India is going to completely miss out on the opportunity, and Pakistan will ensure that India will continue to miss out on this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Shahid. That was very interesting. And I'm really envious of your meetings together, Khalid and Shahid. They must be really, very interesting and informative as well. We should all of us get together sometime. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, now Shahid, there is a question for you from India. This is Devyanshu, and he's asking why has China and Russia not recognized Taliban government yet, and what is holding them from recognizing them?
Look, it's just a matter of time when they will ultimately recognize the Taliban government. My question would be, why hasn't India recognized the Taliban government? I mean, don't you want to be the first ones to recognize the Taliban and upset Pakistan? I mean, that will be an interesting scenario, Khalid, right? Where India recognizes the Taliban and Pakistan is still wondering what's going to happen. In any case, I think Afghanistan at the moment is in a bit of a transition, and I would say there's a lot of things that need to be done on the behalf of the Taliban as well. The Taliban administration needs to really, really quickly and they need to up their game basically. If they're not, I mean, they have been saying that they are willing to work with the international community, but they're not really kind of implementing the sort of reforms that the region wants to see or the global community wants to see. There are a lot of irreversible realities that need to be understood. So there is some lacks in Afghanistan as well that needs to be resolved. But ultimately, I think, maybe 1 week down the track, 2 weeks down the track, a month or 2 months or 6 months, it's going to happen. There is an OIC summit coming up in Pakistan where we are going to discuss Afghanistan as a major agenda item. Most likely,
and Russia is also invited.
Yeah, so I think at the OIC summit, some sort of strategic understanding is going to be created with respect to situation in Afghanistan, with respect to the recognition of the current Afghan administration and the future cooperation agreements with them. I think that what Pakistan is doing is it is implementing a very smart strategy of, basically it is trying to move along with its allies rather than going unilaterally and expecting its OIC partners to follow suit, which is not going to happen. So Pakistan has really taken a conciliatory approach as far as the recognition and cooperation with Afghanistan is concerned. For example, the Foreign Minister Qureshi has been on a bit of a road trip. He's been going to Central Asia, he's been going to Iran, he's been going to Middle East, he's been going to Africa as well, trying to rally support for what Pakistan is doing with what Pakistan thinks is the right solution for the future of Afghanistan, and have Afghanistan recognized by international community, by the Muslim world. So the doors for aid, for cooperation, for trade, are open. And to be honest, I mean, I am personally very upset over the situation in Afghanistan at the moment, because from a humanitarian point of view, there is a lot of problems in Afghanistan right now, especially the scarcity of food. It's just pathetic how the international community is not responding to the crisis in Afghanistan, which was created by the Western forces, the occupation of the Western forces for over 20 years. I mean, how can you just destroy a country and leave? That's just terrible. The international community needs to step up. They need to pump aid into Afghanistan. Whether or not they recognize the Afghan government right now or not, in the short term or the medium term or the long term, whatever the case is, politics can wait. But the international community at the moment, they really, really need to pump aid into Afghanistan because it's really headed towards a disaster at the moment.
I completely agree with you. The politics aside, at this moment we need to think about the Afghan children, Afghan women who are starving in this winter cold. Okay, Khalid and Shahid, can I have your concluding remarks regarding today's topic? What is the way forward for Pakistan, especially considering the recent developments? And I'm in particular talking about Russia at the moment.
Khalid, do you want to go ahead first?
Yeah, I guess I'll go ahead. I want to comment a little bit on what you had to say about the Afghanistan situation. You've got this dead on, and I've always appreciated how you approach your analysis. I think you've got this dead on. We have to understand that from a point of view of where Pakistan stands, with Russia we have to work on tenderfoot. The Russians are very good at portraying an image or a position that is not intrinsically in our favor. But in short-term gains or in short-term returns may benefit Pakistan. And we need to be very careful in looking at the short-term return rather than the long-term result. Understandably, this has not been a point of view that the Pakistani government has ever taken, where they have looked at long-term strategy over short-term result. And granted, Pakistan has never been in a position where it could look into the long-term return of something that they could do. I think Musharraf was the first that was able to plan out a strategy where he was able to use U.S. funds to help stabilize the Pakistani economy, generate growth, decentralize, denationalize banks, bring a consumer culture, and it was a well-planned strategy, but we haven't seen anything since then. And Pakistan is on the verge, as Shahid said, technologically, economically, we are on the verge, and we need to be very careful that we don't allow foreign powers to use minority interests to derail Pakistan from what our objectives should be. In terms of the Russians, and again, I keep coming back to the Russians, and I am saying we need to be careful because I have a very, very big suspicion of the Russian establishment. They are very good at delivering the results that they need for the Russian state and having to sacrifice another country's independence or another country's interests or another country's territory is not something the Russians would hesitate to do. So we need to be very careful. I don't think we need to worry about the Russian-Indian component. I think that's just a commercial relationship. The U.S. has moved into the Indian market very strong in terms of diplomatically, militarily, strategically, intelligence. So the handshake is started there, and the Russians understand that's out. But so from the point of view of Pakistan, Russia cannot be trusted on any point of view, and we need to look at it very carefully. We will always be thinking of what is our way out and how to keep Pakistan's interests and Pakistan's nation from being damaged. I'll hand over to Shahid.
Thank you, Khalid. First of all, look, the way I look at it is you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your neighbors, right? So, and then you choose friends, and sometimes you fall out of favor with friends, right? So it's just the way life works. It's one of the mysteries of life. So I think we should really, really carefully approach our relations with Russia. We need to understand that Russia is a major player in the triangular competition of US, China, and Russia. It is a major player in the triangular competition between Pakistan, India, and China. So In my mind, from a geostrategic angle, for Pakistan to approach its relations with Russia without being cognizant of these realities and Russia's role in these triangular competitions in our region, which directly affect us, that will be absolutely foolish. We need to be, it goes without saying, we do need to engage with Russia, and as Khalid stated, it goes down to Musharraf's strategy in 2002 when he initiated a plan to re-engage with Russia, and we have seen a consistent rise in cooperation between Pakistan and Russia. But here's the catch, right? We need to identify areas where there is a significant room for friction between Pakistan and Russia, such as Afghanistan, such as Central Asia. So when we approach, these regions for economics, for other, purposes such as trade and all that, we need to keep in mind that we have to cooperate with Russia with a mindset that we are not going to compromise on Pakistan's own geo-economic interests, especially when we talk about Central Asia, South Asia region. Pakistan is a bona fide player in this region. We have genuine interests in India. We have genuine interests in Afghanistan. We have genuine interest in Iran, in Central Asia, in China. And we, like I've said before, Pakistan is a country that is about to take off. It is looking to grow. And in this context, we need to ensure that these two triangular competitions, which Russia is a part of, do not actually prove to be a counterproductive trend for Pakistan from a geopolitical point of view. What we need to do, though, is that Pakistan needs to have active engagement with the Central Asian countries and Russia. We need to develop ground lines of communications with the Central Asian countries, with Afghanistan, and including Russia as well, to be able to have overland trade, inwards and outward trade from Pakistani ports to Russia from Central Asia and Central Asia itself. That will kind of create and this is the key point here. Interdependence is probably the best, insurance policy as far as we are concerned. So if we develop interdependence with Russia economically, from the point of view of transit trade, from the point of geoeconomics, I think it will eventually overshadow the geosecurity, kind of transactional relationship they have with India. And before I quit, I just want to say a few words about the the sale of S-400 and others. To be very honest with you, I wrote an article about this. It does not significantly impact what Pakistan is able to do in case of a war. S-400 is a very powerful system, but every powerful system has its own drawbacks as well. India needed S-400 for a specific purpose. It will certainly help India to somewhat destabilize the region in terms of its strategic posture. But I do not see an escalating trend, because it does not really prove to be a game changer as far as India is concerned. India has been investing a lot of money into air defense, into ballistic missile defense systems. So it is just a continuation of their acquisitions. And I think that, as Khalid has mentioned, it's just a commercial relationship. India is more interested in its geopolitical relationship with the West. They want to leverage their relationship with the U.S. as much as possible, as much as they can, vis-a-vis China, so they can have access to technology. They can have access to the Western markets. They can have access to Western investments, etc. But let's face it, India is never going to fight China. If they fight China, India is finished, because it will eventually, basically the war against China is going to convert into a massive disaster for the Indian military. And it will eventually actually translate into a trilateral war, like a three-front war scenario for India, which they are going to lose. So India does not really have the appetite, nor it has the military.
But Shahid, even then the US is placing its bets on India for containment of China. Why is that?
Well, that is because, look, if you're the United States right now, you really ran out of options because most of the world wants to have good relations with China. Most of the world wants to trade with China. And they needed one useful idiot, really. I mean, India is that useful idiot because it is run by people who do not have any strategic understanding. They are sacrificing India's long-term objectives for a short-term political gain at home. So it's like India was best suited to try and contain China, but we've seen in Galwan, we've seen in Sikkim, we've seen in some other parts of Sino-Indian border that every time there's been a confrontation, the Indian military it has been left in absolute embarrassment. So India is not militarily ready to take on PLA, and if it ever was, I do not think that India will take the initiative to kind of go ahead and fight China, because PLA, frankly speaking, is from a capability point of view is at an entirely different level. China is the second country, and there are only two countries in the world right now that has an active automated kill chain established right now. They have a C4I system in place, very much like the US. So, let me try and encapsulate this, right? The sort of war India wants to fight against China does not exist anymore. They want to fight the sort of war with China which the US forces fought in Iraq in 1990s, right? But the sort of war China will fight against India is the sort of war India has not even experienced yet, because of a significant gap in military capability. India will realize very, very quickly what it means to face a modern military force, possibly from two fronts. So I think for overall scenario, Pakistan very quickly, Pakistan will maintain its deterrent strategy. Pakistan will continue to engage with Russia. Calculated engagement with Russia, calculated engagement with other partners. And obviously, our leadership has stated that they're willing to engage with India if India is willing to engage with them. So overall, I think the Pakistan is very well positioned in the region. We are aware of threats and challenges that are facing this region and Pakistan, and I feel that we are ready as well to face any of those challenges as in the short term, medium term, or the long term. India has been completely embarrassed in Afghanistan. The way they left, they had to pack their bags and leave all of their stuff behind. It's really embarrassing. I mean, I would have cried if that had happened to me. Khalid, do you have any words on that?
Okay, I have received a few questions as well. Should I take them?
Yeah, please go ahead.
It's Sikandar Asif, and he's saying in first Cold War, we were with the US and took the heat of the opposite alliance and in the form of fall of Dhaka, while India was non-aligned with anyone. Now in this second Cold War, India is supporting US, it's part of Quad, yet managing to get weapons from Russia. So by boycotting Democracy Summit, why we show that we are again taking sides, and why not balancing a relationship with both China and the USA?
We're not taking sides.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, that we're not taking sides.
Yes, exactly.
I think we need to understand here that India is doing what is best for India. should we say, and this may offend some of you, the girlfriend that has stepped in is the United States. And sure, the U.S. is going to show off some very pretty things and offer some very good things to the Indians, but at the end of the day, it's going to be India that suffers for that relationship. So posing up and Pakistan taking sides, I don't think so. We have maintained a clean position where we believe that Pakistan should be thinking from Pakistan's interests now. We shouldn't be thinking on who can we help, how can we help them, or how can we benefit from them. We as a nation now need to really understand that it needs to be Pakistan's interests first. China can help us a great deal, so can Russia. But we cannot take one person's side over the other because we will hurt Pakistan in the end. So the idea that we've taken sides or that we will take sides, as I said before, and Shahid also said, it is not beneficial to Pakistan's interests. We saw what happened when we took the U.S. side on Afghanistan. Pakistan saw 80,000 lives martyred in a war that was not our war, that we turned into our war. We saw what happened when we sided with Mujahideen and the United States. Pakistan was immediately sanctioned. So we need to start thinking from the point of view of what is best for Pakistan. And taking sides, I really don't think we have the inclination to take any sides, because our interest in our emergence and our growth needs to be the priority there.
All right.
Syeda, it's regarding what Khalid has said, absolutely fascinating. Look, diversify your trade, first of all. Diversify your exports. Diversify your income streams. Diversify your geopolitical relationships. Diversify your military relations, especially with the context of military hardware procurement, research and development, manufacturing, etc. Diversify as much as you possibly can, because the world is bigger than China, Russia, and the US. Pakistan should have a very proactive, very balanced, very broad-based policy. We should engage with with Latin America. We should engage with Africa. We should engage with ASEAN, Indonesia, these countries more often, and especially the European Union, because most of the countries inside the European Union are politically neutral. They can collectively have an international political opinion, but for the most part, they are absolutely neutral. Pakistan will be best served if we diversify our relations and reduce our dependence from, I would say, some of you might not like this, reduce your dependence from China, reduce dependence from the US, reduce your dependence from Saudi Arabia, Iran, everything, right? So you need to diversify the entire segment of your foreign relations and entrench it really into the entire global spectrum, like China has done. China is the biggest trading partner for more than 100 countries in the world. Why can't you do that, right? I mean, that's a lesson to be learned. China has done it in 20 years. We might take 25. But, this strategic understanding needs to exist in Pakistan, that what we need to do, what we ought to do right now is what's good for Pakistan. Not just in short term, but also in our long-term strategic interest. We need to make decisions that are well informed. They are flexible. They keep room for maneuver, and above everything, they need to come with an exit strategy. Thank you very much.
I completely agree with you, Shahid. Now there's a question from Nitin from India, and he's saying that Shahid is talking about international aid for Afghanistan, but at the same time he's saying that India has to take Pakistan's permission. Isn't it contradictory? But he's also saying that I agree with Shahid that we should leave politics aside.
Look, Pakistan's permission would not even have been required if India was working with Pakistan. But India, since these Hindu fascists have, executed state capture in India, they have been hostile to us. They are our enemies. They are brutalizing our people in Kashmir. they have attacked Pakistan. We are not going to function in an environment where India acts as the bully in the region, or tries to act as a bully in the region. Normally speaking, under normal circumstances, transit trade to Afghanistan would be a normal transaction. It would not require permissions or anything else, because that's been happening for decades, right? Pakistan has been actively facilitating trade between Central Asia and India, but the fact that India has taken a very ignorant and belligerent stance towards Pakistan, those permissions or those accesses, wherever leverage exists, Pakistan is going to try and use this leverage. It's not of Pakistan's doing. It's basically been done by your government. So to blame Pakistan for this is simply just irrational. Thank you.
Right. Yes, I completely agree with you, Shahid. And I think Khalid has left us. He was having some trouble. And I wanted to thank him. And I thank you, Shahid, for your valuable analysis. It was very, very informative. I am sure that the audience, all of the listeners, learned a lot today. Thank you for your time. And you already have given your concluding remarks. Thanks again.
Thank you, Syeda, for having me today. Also grateful for Khalid. He's also always very articulate. Great to have a conversation with him as well. So thank you very much for having me today, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you everyone for listening.